The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the skies of Los Angeles in shades of orange and pink. The city buzzed with its usual energy, cars honking, people rushing home after long days at work, and the faint hum of distant conversations filling the air. Among the crowd, a man walked with quiet confidence. He wasn't flashy or loud, but there was something about him that made heads turn. His name was Keanu Reeves. You might have heard of him. He's the guy from those action movies where he dodges bullets and rides motorcycles like a superhero. But today, Keanu wasn't on set or preparing for his next big role. Today, he was just another car enthusiast, drawn to the sleek lines and roaring engines of luxury vehicles. Keanu had always loved cars. They weren't just machines to him. They were works of art, each one telling its own story. And so, on this particular evening, he found himself standing outside an upscale Ferrari dealership. It wasn't the kind of place most people would walk into casually. The building itself looked more like a museum than a store, all glass walls and polished floors. Inside, rows of gleaming Ferraris sat under bright lights, their vibrant colors catching the fading sunlight streaming through the windows. Red, yellow, black. Each car seemed to scream speed and power. For someone like Keanu, who appreciated both beauty and performance, it was hard not to be mesmerized. He pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The air felt different here, cool and crisp, almost sterile. There was a faint smell of leather and polish, the kind you'd expect in a high-end showroom. Keanu glanced around, taking it all in. He wasn't wearing anything fancy, just his usual outfit, a pair of worn jeans, a simple t-shirt, and sneakers. Around his neck hung a small silver cross, a piece of jewelry that meant the world to him. It wasn't expensive or flashy. It didn't even match the glitz and glamour of the place, but it was special. His mother had given it to him years ago, and it reminded him of her every time he touched it. To Keanu, it wasn't just a religious symbol. It was a connection to his past, a reminder of where he came from. At first, no one paid much attention to him. A few salespeople stood near the cars, chatting amongst themselves or scrolling through their phones. One of them finally noticed Keanu and looked up, but only briefly. His eyes scanned Keanu's casual attire, the faded jeans, the plain shirt, and immediately dismissed him. Probably just some guy killing time, the salesperson thought to himself. Without a second glance, he went back to whatever he was doing, completely uninterested. This wasn't the first time Keanu had been treated this way. People often judged him based on how he looked, assuming he couldn't afford the things they were selling. But Keanu didn't let it bother him. He was used to it by now. Instead of letting the cold reception get to him, Keanu wandered around the showroom admiring the cars up close. Each one was breathtaking, a masterpiece of engineering and design. He stopped in front of a bright red Ferrari, its curves practically glowing under the spotlight. Leaning slightly forward, he ran his fingers gently along the smooth surface, imagining what it would feel like to drive such a beast. The engine must roar like thunder, he thought. The tires would grip the road like claws, hugging every curve. It was easy to see why people dreamed of owning these cars. They represented freedom, excitement, and a little bit of rebellion. As Keanu continued exploring, he caught snippets of conversations between the salespeople and other customers. Most of them revolved around numbers. How many miles per hour, how much horsepower, how fast it could go from 0 to 60. But none of that really mattered to Keanu. What fascinated him was the craftsmanship, the way each detail had been carefully thought out. Even the stitching on the seats looked perfect, as if someone had spent hours making sure everything was just right. He wished he could meet the designers, ask them about their process, maybe even learn a thing or two. Cars like these weren't just built. They were created with passion. Despite his obvious interest, the staff barely acknowledged him. Occasionally, someone would glance in his direction, but their eyes would quickly move away when they realized he wasn't dressed like the typical customer. Keanu didn't mind being ignored. In fact, it gave him a chance to take his time, to soak in every detail without feeling rushed. Still, he couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the warmth of the cars and the coldness of the people around him. These machines were designed to bring joy, yet the atmosphere felt impersonal, almost unwelcoming. After a while, Keanu decided to approach one of the salespeople. He figured it wouldn't hurt to ask a few questions, maybe learn something new. The man behind the desk looked up reluctantly, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. When Keanu spoke, his voice was calm and friendly. "Hi, I was wondering if you could tell me more about this model," he said, gesturing toward a nearby car. The salesperson raised an eyebrow, surprised that someone like Keanu would actually speak up. For a moment, he considered brushing him off again, but then he remembered his job. With a forced smile, he began rattling off technical details, though his tone suggested he didn't think Keanu would understand any of it. Keanu listened intently, nodding occasionally as the salesperson talked. But before long, the man's patience wore thin. He glanced down at Keanu's necklace, the silver cross, and sneered. "Nice accessory," he said sarcastically. "You here to bless the cars or something? Maybe you think this is holy ground?" His words echoed in the otherwise quiet showroom, drawing the attention of a few nearby customers. Some chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or feel uncomfortable. Others simply stared, waiting to see how Keanu would react. For a brief moment, Keanu felt a twinge of hurt. The cross wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a part of him, a symbol of his faith and family. But instead of lashing out or showing anger, he chose to remain calm. Smiling politely, he replied, "No, I'm just here because I love cars." His tone was gentle, almost disarming. The salesperson, however, wasn't satisfied. Rolling his eyes, he muttered something under his breath about wasting time and turned away, leaving Keanu standing alone once again. Though the comment stung, Keanu refused to let it ruin his evening. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that people often acted out of ignorance or insecurity. Rather than dwell on the negativity, he focused on what brought him here in the first place: the cars. Slowly, he resumed his exploration, losing himself in the beauty of the machines around him. Little did he know, this encounter was far from over, and the real story was just beginning. Keanu didn't let the salesperson's rude comment linger in his mind for too long. Instead, he moved on to another car, this time a sleek black Ferrari with sharp edges and an aggressive stance. It looked like it was ready to leap forward at any moment, even while parked. Keanu leaned in closer, studying the way the light reflected off its glossy surface. He imagined himself behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel as the engine roared to life. For a few seconds, he forgot about the awkward exchange with the salesperson. Cars had always been his escape, a way to dream bigger than reality allowed. But the peace didn't last long. The same salesperson who had mocked him earlier decided to follow up on his earlier jab. Walking over with a smirk plastered across his face, the man crossed his arms and leaned against the car next to Keanu. "So," he said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear, "are you saving up for one of these? Or is the cross supposed to bring you good luck?" His tone dripped with sarcasm, and there was no mistaking the intent behind his words. He wanted to embarrass Keanu, to make him feel out of place in this world of wealth and luxury. Keanu turned to look at him, his expression calm but unreadable. There was no anger in his eyes, no hint of frustration. If anything, he seemed almost amused by the situation. "I'm just here to look," he replied simply, his voice steady and polite. "Cars like these are amazing. I don't need to buy one to appreciate them." The salesperson snorted, clearly unimpressed by the answer. To him, Keanu's response only confirmed what he already thought. This guy didn't belong here. "You know," the salesperson continued, his confidence growing as he realized Keanu wasn't fighting back, "these cars aren't exactly cheap. Some of them cost more than most people make in 10 years. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Not trying to be rude or anything, but maybe you should stick to something more realistic." He emphasized the last word, making sure Keanu understood the implication. Realistic meant practical, affordable, ordinary. Everything Keanu supposedly was. The comment drew a few more stares from other customers milling around the showroom. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, and a handful outright entertained by the spectacle. A young couple standing near a yellow Ferrari exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. One older man shook his head slightly, clearly disapproving of the salesperson's behavior. But no one said a word. They all watched, waiting to see how Keanu would respond. For a moment, Keanu stood perfectly still, his hands resting lightly on the railing that separated him from the car. He could have walked away. He could have ignored the man entirely and continued admiring the vehicles. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the condescending tone, or maybe it was the fact that the salesperson refused to see him as anything more than his appearance. Whatever the reason, Keanu decided to engage, not out of anger, but out of curiosity. "Do you think everyone who comes here can afford these cars?" Keanu asked, his voice soft but firm. The question caught the salesperson off guard. He blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift in the conversation. Before he could answer, Keanu continued, "People come to places like this for different reasons. Some want to buy, sure, but others just want to dream. Is that so wrong?" The room fell silent. Even the background chatter between other salespeople and customers seemed to fade away. The salesperson opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out. He hadn't expected Keanu to challenge him, especially not in such a composed manner. For a split second, he considered apologizing. After all, it wouldn't hurt to admit he might have misjudged someone. But pride got in the way. Instead, he forced a laugh, trying to brush off the tension. "Dreaming doesn't pay the bills, buddy," he quipped, though his earlier bravado was noticeably absent. Keanu smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Maybe not," he said, his tone carrying a hint of sadness. "But dreams are important. They remind us of what's possible." With that, he stepped back from the car and glanced around the showroom. His gaze lingered on the Ferraris, their polished surfaces gleaming under the lights. Then, without another word, he turned and began walking toward the exit. The salesperson watched him go, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. Part of him was glad the awkward encounter was over, but another part couldn't shake the feeling that he'd missed something. Keanu's words echoed in his mind. Dreams are important. What did that even mean? Wasn't he just some random guy in sneakers and jeans? Why did he talk like he knew something the rest of them didn't? Before Keanu reached the door, another customer walked in, a well-dressed man in a tailored suit exuding confidence and authority. The salesperson immediately perked up, forgetting all about Keanu. "Good evening, sir," he exclaimed, rushing over with a wide grin. "Welcome to our dealership. How can I assist you today?" The man nodded politely, returning the greeting. "Thank you," he said. "I'm looking for recommendations for a high-end vehicle. Something fast, luxurious, and reliable." The salesperson practically lit up at the request. This was the kind of customer he lived for, the type who didn't blink at six-figure price tags. Eager to impress, he launched into a detailed description of the latest models, pointing out their features and advantages. As he spoke, the man listened intently, nodding occasionally. But then, almost casually, he added, "Oh, and by the way, I'm producing a new action movie. Keanu Reeves is starring in it. Do you have any suggestions for a car that fits his character?" The words hit the salesperson like a punch to the gut. His jaw dropped, and his face turned pale. All the blood drained from his cheeks as realization dawned on him. Slowly, he turned his head toward the door where Keanu was still standing, his hand on the handle. Everyone else in the showroom followed his gaze, their eyes widening in disbelief. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people pieced together the truth. The man in the sneakers and jeans wasn't just a dreamer, he was the Keanu Reeves. The salesperson froze, unable to move or speak. His mind raced, replaying every snide comment, every sarcastic remark he'd made earlier. How could he have been so blind? How could he have treated one of Hollywood's biggest stars like... He couldn't even finish the thought. Panic set in as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. What would Keanu do now? Would he call out the dealership publicly, demand an apology? Or worse, would he walk away silently, leaving the salesperson to deal with the fallout? But Keanu didn't do any of those things. Without hesitation, he pushed open the door and stepped outside. The cool evening air greeted him, a welcome contrast to the tense atmosphere inside. He took a deep breath, letting the fresh breeze wash over him. For a moment he stood there staring up at the sky. Stars were beginning to appear, tiny pinpricks of light scattered across the darkening canvas. Despite everything that had happened, Keanu felt oddly at peace. He knew he couldn't control how others treated him, but he could control how he responded. And today, he chose kindness over bitterness. Back inside, the salesperson was still frozen in place, his thoughts spiraling out of control. The producer tapped him on the shoulder, snapping him out of his trance. "Is everything okay?" the man asked, raising an eyebrow. The salesperson stammered, struggling to find the right words. Yes, of course," he managed to say, though his voice betrayed his nerves. "Just, surprised to meet Mr. Reeves. Such a humble guy." The producer chuckled, clearly unaware of the drama that had unfolded moments ago. "That's Keanu for you," he said. "Always down to earth. You should have seen him on set. He insisted on doing his own stunts, even the dangerous ones. Guy's fearless." The salesperson nodded weakly, forcing a smile. Inside, however, he was a wreck. He couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd treated Keanu, how dismissive and rude he'd been. The guilt gnawed at him, refusing to let go. As the producer continued browsing the showroom, the salesperson retreated to the back office, his mind racing. He replayed the entire interaction in his head, cringing at every misplaced word and arrogant assumption. How could he have been so wrong about someone? Keanu hadn't argued, hadn't demanded respect. He'd simply walked away, leaving the salesperson to confront his own mistakes. It was a lesson the man wouldn't soon forget. Meanwhile, outside the dealership, Keanu climbed onto his motorcycle, the familiar rumble of the engine grounding him. He adjusted his helmet, checked the cross around his neck one last time, and revved the throttle. As he sped off into the night, disappearing into the sea of Los Angeles traffic, he couldn't help but smile. Life had a funny way of teaching lessons, often when you least expected them. And while the salesperson's words had stung, they also reminded Keanu of something important. True strength lies not in proving others wrong, but in rising above their judgments with grace and dignity. The next morning, the Ferrari dealership buzzed with chatter. Word of what had happened spread like wildfire among the staff. By the time the salesperson arrived at work, everyone already knew about his embarrassing encounter with Keanu Reeves. Some employees whispered behind closed doors, while others openly discussed it in hushed tones near the coffee machine. The atmosphere was tense, filled with a mix of shock, disbelief, and pity for the man who had mocked one of Hollywood's most beloved actors. For the salesperson, walking into the office felt like stepping into a spotlight he didn't want. His co-workers avoided direct eye contact, but their sideways glances said it all. A few tried to offer awkward condolences, patting him on the back or muttering something about how these things happen. But none of it made him feel better. If anything, it made the weight of his mistake press down even harder. He couldn't stop thinking about Keanu, his calm demeanor, his quiet strength, the way he hadn't retaliated despite being treated so poorly. It wasn't just guilt-eating. Away at the salesperson, it was shame. He had judged someone based on appearances, and now he was paying the price. As the hours passed, the salesperson found himself replaying every detail of the interaction. He remembered the way Keanu had smiled politely when insulted, the soft tone of his voice when he talked about dreams, and the dignity with which he'd walked out the door. None of those moments screamed movie star, yet that's exactly who Keanu was. And instead of treating him with respect, the salesperson had acted like a fool. What bothered him most was knowing that Keanu hadn't deserved any of it. From everything he'd heard about the actor, Keanu was known for his humility and kindness. People loved him not because of his fame, but because of the person he was. By midday, the salesperson couldn't take it anymore. Sitting alone at his desk, staring blankly at his computer screen, he realized he needed to do something. Ignoring the situation wouldn't make it go away. Pretending it never happened wouldn't erase the memory of his own behavior. No matter how uncomfortable it might be, He owed Keanu an apology, and not just any apology, but a sincere one that acknowledged his mistake and showed genuine remorse. But how could he reach someone like Keanu Reeves? Actors like him were surrounded by layers of security, agents, and publicists. They didn't answer random calls or emails from strangers, especially not from people who had insulted them. Still, the salesperson decided to try. He reached out to the dealership's manager, explaining what had happened and asking if there was any way to contact Keanu's team. To his surprise, the manager agreed to help. While the salesperson waited anxiously, the manager sent a message through the proper channels, hoping for a response. Days went by without any word. The salesperson began to lose hope, convinced that Keanu wouldn't want anything to do with him after what had happened. After all, why would someone as successful and respected as Keanu bother giving a second chance to someone who had treated him so badly? The thought kept him up at night, replaying scenarios in his head where Keanu ignored his apology or worse, used the incident to publicly call him out. He imagined headlines mocking him, social media posts ridiculing his behavior, and colleagues whispering about him long after the story faded from the news cycle. Then, just when he least expected it, the manager called him into the office. "You're not going to believe this," the manager said, holding up his phone. On the screen was a reply from Keanu's assistant. The actor had agreed to meet with the salesperson, not in a formal setting, not surrounded by cameras or reporters, but privately over coffee. The salesperson's heart raced as he read the message again and again. Was this real? Had Keanu really forgiven him enough to give him another chance? Overwhelmed with gratitude and nerves, the salesperson spent the rest of the day preparing for the meeting. He rehearsed what he wanted to say, writing down his thoughts and crossing out lines that sounded insincere. He wanted his apology to come from the heart, not from a place of obligation or fear. He also thought about bringing a gift, a small token of appreciation, but quickly dismissed the idea. This wasn't about making amends with material things. It was about showing respect and humility. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. The salesperson arrived at the cafe early, pacing back and forth outside until he saw Keanu approaching. Even dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, Keanu carried himself with an ease that commanded attention. The salesperson swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay calm as he stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Keanu shook his hand firmly, his expression warm and welcoming. "It's no problem," he replied, his voice calm and reassuring. "Let's grab a seat." They sat down at a quiet corner table, the hum of conversation around them fading into the background. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The salesperson fidgeted nervously, unsure where to start. Keanu, sensing his discomfort, broke the silence first. "I know why we're here," he said gently. "And I want you to know, it's okay. We all make mistakes." Those simple words hit the salesperson like a wave of relief. Tears welled up in his eyes as he finally found the courage to speak. "I'm so sorry," he began, his voice trembling. "What I said to you, it was wrong. I judged you before I even knew who you were, and that's not fair. I let my assumptions get the better of me and I hurt you. I'll never forgive myself for that." Keanu listened patiently, nodding occasionally as the salesperson poured out his apology. When he finished, Keanu leaned back in his chair, studying him thoughtfully. "You don't need to keep apologizing," he said. "Everyone makes snap judgments sometimes. It's part of being human. What matters is what you do. After you realize you've made a mistake, you reached out. That takes courage." The salesperson wiped his eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "That means more than you know. I promise I'll do better. I won't let this happen again." Keanu smiled softly, his gaze kind and understanding. "We're all works in progress," he said. "Just remember to treat everyone with the same respect you'd want for yourself. That's all anyone can ask." As the conversation continued, the tension slowly melted away. They talked about cars, movies, and life in general, finding common ground despite their differences. the salesperson learned that Keanu wasn't just a talented actor. He was also deeply passionate about motorcycles, music, and helping others. By the end of their meeting, the initial awkwardness had transformed into something unexpected: mutual respect. When they parted ways, Keanu handed the salesperson a signed photo of himself sitting on a motorcycle. Written across the bottom were the words, "Forgiveness drives us forward." The salesperson held the picture tightly, vowing to carry its message with him always. As he watched Keanu walk away, he realized this experience had taught him far more than he ever anticipated. It wasn't just about owning up to his mistakes. It was about learning to see people for who they truly are, beyond appearances and assumptions. From that day on, the salesperson approached every customer differently. Gone were the quick judgments and dismissive attitudes. In their place was a newfound sense of empathy and openness. Every interaction became an opportunity to connect, to listen, and to learn. And whenever doubt crept in, he glanced at the photo Keanu had given him, reminding himself of the lesson he'd been fortunate enough to receive. The meeting at the cafe marked a turning point for the salesperson, but it wasn't just a personal transformation. It rippled through the entire dealership. Word of Keanu's gracious response spread quickly among the staff, leaving everyone stunned. No one could believe that someone as famous and successful as Keanu Reeves would take the time to forgive such a blatant mistake. It was almost unheard of in their world, where egos often clashed and grudges lingered. But here was Keanu, not only accepting an apology, but also offering wisdom and encouragement. At first, the salesperson kept the story mostly to himself, sharing only the details he felt comfortable discussing. However, whispers inevitably made their way around the office. Some employees were skeptical, wondering if the whole thing had been exaggerated. Others admired Keanu's humility and wished they could have handled similar situations with the same grace. The manager called a brief team meeting to address what had happened, emphasizing the importance of treating every customer with respect, regardless of how they looked or acted. "This is a lesson we can all learn from," he said firmly. "Assumptions cost us more than sales. They cost us integrity." For the salesperson, though, the impact ran deeper. He couldn't stop thinking about the conversation he'd had with Keanu. Those few hours over coffee had changed something inside him. Before, he had seen customers as walking dollar signs, people whose value was directly tied to the size of their wallets. If someone didn't look wealthy, they weren't worth his time. But now, he realized how wrong that mindset was. People came into the dealership for different reasons. Some wanted to buy, others dreamed of owning, and still others simply loved cars. None of those motivations made them any less deserving of kindness and attention. Determined to change, the salesperson threw himself into his work with renewed purpose. Every morning he reminded himself of Keanu's advice: treat everyone with the same respect you'd want for yourself. At first it felt strange. Old habits die hard, and he caught himself slipping back into judgmental thoughts more than once. But each time he paused, took a deep breath, and reset his focus. Instead of sizing people up based on their clothes or accessories, he asked questions. What brought them to the dealership? Were they looking for speed, luxury, or practicality? Did they dream of racing down open highways or cruising through city streets? Slowly, his approach began to pay off. Customers responded positively to his newfound attitude. They appreciated being treated like human beings instead of potential transactions. One day, a young couple walked in, holding hands and looking nervous. Their outfits were simple, and they didn't seem like typical Ferrari buyers. In the past, the salesperson might have dismissed them immediately, assuming they were just browsing. But this time, he greeted them warmly and asked how he could help. To his surprise, they explained that they were saving up for a special occasion, their 5th wedding anniversary, and wanted to start exploring options. Even if they weren't ready to buy yet, they wanted to get a sense of what was out there. The salesperson spent nearly an hour talking to them, answering their questions and showing them various models. By the end of the visit, the couple left, smiling, promising to return when they were ready. Stories like these became more frequent. The salesperson found joy in connecting with people, learning about their lives, and helping them envision possibilities. His colleagues noticed the shift too. Where before he had been aloof and dismissive, now he was engaged and attentive. Sales numbers improved, but more importantly, so did customer satisfaction. People started requesting him specifically, praising his patience and professionalism. Even the manager commented on the change, saying, "You've really turned things around, keep it up." But the transformation wasn't limited to his professional life. Outside of work, the salesperson began reflecting on his behavior in other areas. How many times had he judged strangers based on appearances? How often had he let pride or insecurity dictate his actions? These thoughts weighed heavily on him, pushing him to be more mindful in everyday interactions. Whether it was chatting with a cashier at the grocery store or holding the door open for someone carrying heavy bags, he made a conscious effort to treat everyone with dignity and care. One evening, after closing up the dealership, the salesperson stopped by the same cafe where he'd met Keanu. He ordered a cup of coffee and sat at the same table, staring out the window. Memories of their conversation flooded his mind. The calmness in Keanu's voice, the sincerity in his eyes, the way he had effortlessly diffused tension with kindness. The salesperson pulled out the signed photo Keanu had given him and traced the words written across the bottom, "Forgiveness drives us forward." It was more than just a quote. It was a philosophy, a reminder that growth comes from letting go of past mistakes and focusing on the future. As he sat there, lost in thought, a woman approached his table. She looked familiar, though he couldn't quite place her face. "Excuse me?" she said hesitantly. "Are you the guy who works at the Ferrari dealership?" The salesperson nodded, unsure of what to expect. "I just wanted to say thank you," she continued. "A few weeks ago I came in with my son. He's a huge car fan, and I wanted to give him a little tour for his birthday. You were so nice to us, even though we weren't planning to buy anything." It meant a lot to him and to me. Her words caught the salesperson off guard. He vaguely remembered the visit, a young boy bouncing with excitement, peppering him with endless questions about engines and designs. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it. But now, hearing how much it had meant to them, he felt a surge of pride. This was why he had changed. Not for bigger commissions or better reviews, but for moments like these, for making people feel valued and respected. After the woman left, the salesperson stayed at the cafe a little longer, sipping his coffee and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. He thought about how far he'd come since that fateful day when he'd mocked Keanu for wearing a cross. Back then, he had been blind to the humanity of the people around him, too focused on surface-level judgments to see beyond. Now, he understood that true worth wasn't measured by wealth or status. It was reflected in the connections we made and the kindness we showed. By the time he left the cafe, night had fallen, and the streets were lit with the soft glow of streetlights. As he drove home, he replayed Keanu's parting words in his mind. "We're all works in progress." The phrase resonated deeply, reminding him that no one was perfect, not even someone as admired as Keanu. Everyone stumbled, made mistakes, and learned along the way. What mattered most was the willingness to grow, to acknowledge faults, and to strive for better. The salesperson arrived home feeling lighter than he had in years. He parked his car, stepped out, and looked up at the stars, dotting the dark sky. For the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful, not just about his career but about life itself. Keanu's forgiveness had given him a second chance, and he intended to honor it by paying it forward. From now on, he vowed to approach every person, every situation, with the same empathy and humility that Keanu had shown him. Because in the end, it wasn't the cars or the money that defined him. It was the way he treated others. And that realization, more than anything else, was worth celebrating. Weeks turned into months, and the salesperson's life continued to change in ways he never expected. The lessons he had learned from Keanu weren't just confined to how he treated customers. They began shaping every aspect of his daily routine. He started waking up earlier, taking time to reflect before heading to work. Each morning he stood in front of the mirror, reminding himself of the man he wanted to be, patient, kind, and open-minded. It wasn't always easy. There were days when old habits crept back in or frustration got the better of him, but he kept pushing forward, determined not to slip back into his old ways. At the dealership, his reputation grew. Customers who had once felt ignored or dismissed now praised him for his attentiveness and genuine interest in their stories. Some even brought friends and family members along on subsequent visits, eager to introduce them to the guy who actually listens. Word-of-mouth recommendations became a regular occurrence, and soon, the salesperson found himself busier than ever. Yet, despite the increased workload, he didn't feel overwhelmed. On the contrary, he felt fulfilled. For the first time, his job wasn't just about selling cars, it was about building relationships. One afternoon, a middle-aged man walked into the showroom, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His clothes were worn, his shoes scuffed, and his expression hesitant. In the past, the salesperson might have written him off as someone who couldn't afford anything. But now he greeted him warmly, offering a handshake and asking if he needed help. The man hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I don't know much about cars," he admitted. "But I've been saving up for years, and I finally have enough to buy something nice for my wife." The story unfolded slowly. The man explained that his wife had worked tirelessly to support their family while he recovered from an injury. She had sacrificed so much, putting her own dreams on hold to ensure they stayed afloat. Now that he was back on his feet, he wanted to surprise her with a gift she'd always dreamed of owning, a convertible. He didn't care about brands or price tags. He just wanted something beautiful, something that would make her smile. Listening to the man's words, the salesperson felt a lump form in his throat. This was exactly the kind of moment he lived for now, the chance to turn someone's dream into reality. Together, they browsed through the options, discussing colors, features, and budgets. When the man settled on a sleek silver convertible, his eyes lit up with excitement. "She's going to love this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. As they finalized the paperwork, the salesperson gave him a small discount, knowing it would mean the world to the couple. The man left the dealership grinning ear to ear, promising to send pictures once his wife saw the car. Moments like these reminded the salesperson why he had chosen this path. It wasn't about the money or the prestige. It was about making a difference, however small, and the ripple effects of his actions reached further than he realized. Other employees at the dealership began following his example, adopting a more empathetic approach to customer service. Even the manager noticed the shift, commenting during a staff meeting that morale and performance had improved across the board. "Whatever you're doing," he told the salesperson afterward, "keep doing it. You're setting the standard for everyone else." Outside of work, the changes in his life continued to unfold. The salesperson became more involved in his community, volunteering at local charities and mentoring young people interested in the automotive industry. He discovered a passion for teaching, sharing his knowledge about cars with kids who might not otherwise have access to such opportunities. One Saturday morning, he spent hours helping a group of teenagers build a go-kart from scratch. Watching their faces light up as the engine roared to life filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't known before. These moments reinforced what Keanu had taught him. True fulfillment came not from material success but from lifting others up. Despite all the progress he'd made, the salesperson still thought about Keanu often. He wondered what the actor was doing, whether he ever thought about their meeting or if he even remembered it at all. Occasionally, he considered reaching out again, maybe sending a note of thanks or updating him on how much he'd grown since their conversation. But each time he hesitated. What could he possibly say that would do justice to the impact Keanu had had on his life? Words seemed inadequate, unable to capture the depth of his gratitude. Then, one evening, fate intervened. The salesperson was attending a charity gala hosted by a local organization supporting underprivileged youth. As he mingled with guests, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, he suddenly spotted a familiar face across the room. At first, He thought he was imagining things. Surely it couldn't be him. But as the figure turned slightly, revealing a warm smile and a silver cross hanging around his neck, there was no mistaking it. It was Keanu Reeves. For a moment, the salesperson froze, unsure of what to do. Should he approach him? Would Keanu even recognize him after all this time? Before he could decide, Keanu caught his eye and waved, motioning for him to come over. Heart pounding, the salesperson made his way through the crowd, rehearsing what he wanted to say in his mind. When he reached Keanu, he extended his hand nervously. "Mr. Reeves," he stammered, "I can't believe you're here." Keanu chuckled, softly, shaking his hand firmly. "It's good to see you again," he said. "How have you been?" The question caught the salesperson off guard. How could he possibly summarize everything that had happened since their last meeting? Instead of trying, he simply smiled. "Better," he replied. "A lot better. Thanks to you." Keanu raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Oh, tell me more." And so, standing in the corner of the crowded ballroom, the salesperson shared his journey. He talked about the changes he'd made at work, the relationships he'd built, and the joy he'd found in helping others. He mentioned the young boy who loved cars, the couple dreaming of a convertible, and the teenagers building a go-kart. Through it all, Keanu listened intently, nodding occasionally and offering encouraging smiles. When the salesperson finished, Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you," he said sincerely. "You've done amazing things." The compliment brought tears to the salesperson's eyes. All the doubts and fears he'd carried melted away in that instant, replaced by a profound sense of validation. Keanu hadn't forgotten him. He cared enough to listen, to acknowledge the effort he'd put into changing. It was more than the salesperson could have hoped for. As the night wore on, they continued talking, moving from personal stories to shared interests. They bonded over their love of motorcycles, swapping tales of thrilling rides and close calls. By the end of the evening, the salesperson realized something important. Keanu wasn't just a mentor or a role model, he was a friend, someone who had shown him kindness when he least deserved it, and who had inspired him to become a better version of himself. When it was time to leave, Keanu handed him another signed photo, this one featuring both of them together at the gala. Written across the bottom were the words, "Kindness is contagious." The salesperson clutched it tightly, vowing to carry its message wherever he went. As he watched Keanu walk away, disappearing into the crowd, he felt a surge of gratitude unlike anything he'd ever experienced. From that day forward, the salesperson carried Keanu's lessons with him, not just in his actions, but in his heart. He knew he would never forget the man who had changed his life, not because of fame or fortune, but because of the simple act of forgiveness. And as he continued down his path of growth and self-improvement, he promised to pass that legacy on to others, proving that kindness truly was contagious. The weeks following the charity gala felt like a new chapter for the salesperson. Meeting Keanu again had reignited something inside him, a deeper sense of purpose, a clearer understanding of what truly mattered in life. He realized that while he had made significant progress over the past few months, there was still so much more he could do. The lessons Keanu had taught him weren't just meant to improve his own life. They were meant to inspire others too. With this newfound clarity, the salesperson decided to take things a step further. At the dealership, he began implementing small but meaningful changes. He encouraged his coworkers to share stories about their favorite customer interactions during team meetings, highlighting moments where kindness or empathy had made a difference. These discussions created a ripple effect, fostering a culture of compassion and mutual respect among the staff. Employees who once competed fiercely against each other now collaborated, supporting one another and providing exceptional service. Even customers noticed the shift. The atmosphere at the dealership became warmer, more inviting, and genuinely enjoyable. But the salesperson didn't stop there. Inspired by Keanu's humility and generosity, he started organizing community events aimed at bringing people together through a shared love of cars. He hosted Dream Car Days, inviting families from local neighborhoods to visit the showroom and explore the vehicles up close. Kids sat in the driver's seats, pretending to race down imaginary highways, while parents marveled at the craftsmanship and design. For many attendees, it was their first time stepping foot in such a luxurious environment, and the salesperson ensured they felt welcome and valued. He even arranged for refreshments and photo booths, turning the events into memorable experiences for everyone involved. One particular dream car day stood out. A young girl named Mia, no older than 10, arrived with her father, clutching a drawing she had made of her dream car. A bright pink convertible with flames painted on the sides. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and when the salesperson saw her sketch, he couldn't help but smile. After showing her around the showroom, he asked if she'd like to sit in a real convertible. Her eyes widened with excitement as she nodded eagerly. As Mia climbed into the front seat, her father snapped photos, tears glistening in his eyes. Later, the salesperson framed Mia's drawing and hung it on the wall of the showroom, labeling it Future Designer Extraordinaire. It became a symbol of hope and possibility, reminding everyone who walked in that dreams, no matter how big or small, deserved to be celebrated. Word of these initiatives spread quickly, earning the dealership recognition not just for its luxury cars, but also for its commitment to giving back to the community. Local newspapers wrote articles praising the efforts, and social media posts flooded in from grateful attendees. People began referring to the dealership as the place with heart, a nickname that filled the salesperson with pride. It wasn't about accolades or publicity. It was about creating opportunities for connection and joy, however simple they might seem. Outside of work, the salesperson continued mentoring young people, especially those interested in pursuing careers in the automotive industry. He partnered with schools and youth organizations to offer workshops and hands-on training sessions, teaching skills ranging from basic car maintenance to advanced mechanics. One of his protégés, a high school senior named Jamal, showed remarkable talent and determination. Under the salesperson's guidance, Jamal built a fully functional electric go-kart, which he later showcased at a regional science fair. When Jamal won first prize, he credited the salesperson for believing in him and encouraging him to pursue his passion. "You changed my life," Jamal said during an emotional acceptance speech. "Thank you for showing me I can achieve anything, if I put my mind to it." These moments of gratitude reinforced the salesperson's belief that every action, no matter how small, had the power to create ripples of positivity. He thought often about Keanu's words, "Kindness is contagious." It wasn't just a phrase, it was a truth he witnessed every day. Whether it was helping a struggling family find the perfect car, inspiring a child to dream bigger, or guiding a teenager toward a brighter future, the impact of his actions reached far beyond what he could see. As time went on, the salesperson found himself reflecting less on the mistakes of his past and more on the possibilities of the future. He understood now that growth wasn't about erasing old memories, but learning from them and using those lessons to build something better. Every interaction became an opportunity to make a difference, to treat others with dignity, to listen without judgment, and to lead with empathy. It wasn't always easy, and there were still days when doubt crept in, but he reminded himself that perfection wasn't the goal, progress was. One evening, as he closed up the dealership, the salesperson noticed a familiar figure standing near the entrance. At first, he thought it was a late customer, but as the person stepped closer, he recognized the face immediately. It was Keanu. Again. The sight of him took the salesperson by surprise, and for a moment, he wondered if he was dreaming. But Keanu's warm smile and calm demeanor reassured him that this was real. "I heard about everything you've been doing," Keanu said, gesturing toward the showroom. "Thought I'd stop by and see it for myself." The salesperson grinned, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "I couldn't have done any of it without your example," he replied. "You set the bar high." Keanu shook his head modestly. "No, you did this on your own. I just gave you a little push. You're the one who ran with it." They spent the next hour touring the showroom, talking about the events, the community programs, and the people whose lives had been touched along the way. Keanu seemed genuinely impressed. nodding approvingly as the salesperson pointed out Mia's drawing on the wall and shared stories of students like Jamal. When they finally sat down in the office, Keanu leaned back in his chair, studying the man before him. "You've come a long way," he said. "I'm proud of you." The compliment brought tears to the salesperson's eyes. He had worked hard to earn redemption, but hearing those words from Keanu validated everything he had strived for. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." Keanu smiled, his expression thoughtful. "Remember what I told you last time? We're all works in progress. Don't ever stop growing, okay?" The salesperson nodded, committing the words to memory. As Keanu prepared to leave, he handed the salesperson another signed photo, this one featuring both of them surrounded by children during one of the dream car days. Written across the bottom were the words, "Keep spreading kindness." It was a message the salesperson would carry with him forever. In the months and years that followed, the salesperson continued living by those principles. His story became a testament to the transformative power of forgiveness and the importance of treating others with respect. He remained deeply connected to his community, always looking for ways to uplift and inspire those around him. And though he never stopped thinking about Keanu, the man who had unknowingly changed his life, he knew that the greatest tribute he could pay was to embody the same humility, grace, and compassion that Keanu had shown him. Life, he realized, was full of unexpected turns. Sometimes we stumbled and fell. Other times we rose higher than we ever imagined possible. What mattered most was how we responded to those moments, the choices we made, the lessons we learned, and the people we chose to become. For the salesperson, meeting Keanu had been more than just a chance encounter. It had been a catalyst for change, a reminder that true success wasn't measured by wealth or fame, but by the positive impact we left on the world. And as he drove home one evening, glancing at the framed photos hanging on his dashboard, he smiled. Each one told a story, a journey of growth, redemption, and gratitude. From the Ferrari dealership to the hearts of countless individuals, the salesperson had proven that kindness truly was contagious. And in doing so, he had honored Keanu's legacy in the best way possible by passing it on.